Welcome to The Explainer. There's a skill you use every single day, probably without even realizing it, and that skill is judgment. Today, inspired by the book The Art of Judgment, we're going to break down what it really means to move beyond just a simple like or dislike. So, let's start with someone we all pretty much know, Hamlet. Think about it. Is he a hero, avenging his father? Is he a villain whose choices cause so much destruction? Or is he something way, way more complicated? Here's what's so wild about Hamlet. At his core, there's this huge contradiction. He treats the women in his life, Ophelia, his mother Gertrude, with just total contempt. But then, in the same play, he turns around and demands that a group of traveling actors be treated with this profound respect, way above their station. When you're dealing with a character that messy, that complex, a simple thumbs up or thumbs down, it just doesn't cut it. It feels kind of cheap, right? We need a better tool to get a handle on this moral and psychological puzzle. And that tool is what we call humanistic judgment. So this is the big idea right here. To really engage with complicated art, or frankly, with complicated situations in our own lives, we have to get past those instant gut reactions. The editor, David Bromwich, just nails it with this quote. He's basically saying the real point of something like Hamlet isn't to find some easy final answer. No, it's about how the work itself opens up a perplexity that has set us to thinking. The real prize is the thinking itself, the wrestling with the tough questions. Okay, so let's dig in a little deeper. What exactly is this thing, humanistic judgment, and what makes it so different from other ways of knowing things? Well, the scholar Roosevelt Montas gives us a fantastic definition. Judgment is what we pull out when we're facing problems that, you can't solve them with a calculator or a spreadsheet. It's our tool for all the gray areas, all the ambiguities that really make up most of human life. You could almost say it's the skill for practical wisdom. The ancient Greeks actually had a word for this, phronesis. It's not about just collecting facts. It's about understanding how to move through a world that is just packed with meaning, with context, and with contradiction. And believe it or not, this idea is ancient. It goes all the way back to Plato. In one of his dialogues, Socrates makes this exact point. See, the questions on the left, they have clear, measurable, objective answers. But the questions on the right, what is just, what is beautiful, what is good, those require something totally different. They require judgment. But this brings up a huge question, doesn't it? If judgment isn't about measurement or scientific proof, how in the world can we ever know if we're getting it right? The philosopher Akil Bilgrami draws this really powerful line in the sand. Science, he says, is trying to find truths that can explain and predict things. But the humanities, they're playing a different game. The goal is getting it right, which means diving in and achieving a deep, rich understanding by wrestling with the full cultural context. And to get it right, you have to see that meaning exists on, two levels. There's the foreground, that's the explicit stuff, the words you read on the page. But that stuff only makes sense because of this vast, invisible background, all the shared cultural habits, the memories, the ways of doing things that we take for granted. And this iceberg visual, it's the perfect way to think about it. The explicit text we see is just the tiny tip sticking out of the water. But the real weight, the real meaning, is shaped by that enormous cultural context hiding just beneath the surface. To really get it, you have to see the whole iceberg. Wittgenstein had this great, simple example of an arrow on a sign. Think about it. The sign itself is just a couple of lines on a piece of wood, but because our cultural background is filled with shooting arrows and pointing with our fingers, we don't even have to think. We immediately see it as a command, go this way. The background is what gives the foreground its power. Okay, but here's a twist. That cultural background isn't fixed, and neither are we. Our judgments aren't just stamped in stone. They change. They evolve. Let's talk about how that happens over a lifetime. Writer Helen Small brings up this fascinating question from Adam Phillips. Basically, he's asking, if your tastes and your values and your whole way of seeing the world are going to change as you get older, what does that mean for the judgments you're making right now? Are they wrong just because they might not last forever? This philosophical thought experiment, The Russian Nobleman, just perfectly shows how absurd it is to try and lock in your judgments forever. This young nobleman is so afraid he'll change that he treats his future self like a total stranger, some corrupted guy he can't trust.
He tries to freeze his values in time, like putting them in a museum instead of treating them as a living, breathing commitment.
And that is the whole point. Judgment isn't some final verdict we issue one time. It's a process. It's alive. The ability to change our minds, to see things in a new light as we grow, that isn't a weakness. It's actually a core part of what it means to be human.
All right, so we've talked about what judgment is, how it works, how it changes, but let's get to the bottom line. Why does any of this matter? Why is cultivating this skill so important? So let's just put a bow on this. We've seen that judgment is our go-to tool for life's uncalculable questions. We've seen that getting it right means digging into that deep cultural background. We know that our judgments have to evolve with us, and all of this is what helps us get beyond a superficial like or dislike world into something much, much richer. And this is why it's so critical right now. In a world where we are just drowning in information, in data, in endless opinions, judgment isn't a luxury anymore. It is an absolutely essential skill for survival. It's how we cut through the noise and figure out what actually matters. So, I'll leave you with this question to chew on. Now that you have this new framework, this idea of looking past the like, of searching for the cultural iceberg, of embracing how your own views can change, what are you going to go back to? What book, what movie, what piece of art are you going to look at with fresh eyes and judge anew?